I said it to Joe Tacopina yesterday. He came over to congratulate me, and he put out his hand, and I said, he did it, and you know it. And then we shook hands, and I passed by.
Hey again, everyone. It is 5 o'clock here in New York. I'm Alicia Menendez, in for Nicole Wallace. 8 months ago, when E. Jean Carroll first took the stand in her case against Donald Trump, the one that ultimately found him liable for sexual abuse, she did so without him in the courtroom. He had chosen not to testify, to not even be in the room. Now, as the second defamation trial brought by Carroll is underway, Trump has taken a different approach: be in the courtroom and be disruptive. Judge Lewis Kaplan today had to admonish the former president multiple times, even at one point threatening to kick him out for making statements that Carroll's lawyer said were loud enough to be heard by the jury. The second case brought by Carroll is solely for defamation. She is seeking $10 million in damages for statements Trump made in 2019. So while he was president of the United States, the Carroll was lying when she claimed he raped her in the 1990s. The jury in the first trial last May already found him liable for sexually abusing her. Court just wrapped for the day a short time ago. It was a day full of testimony from Carroll, who gave an emotional account of how the ex-president's lies forever changed her life. He said, "I made it up to sell a book, and that is a lie," she said. And he said, "My false accusations damaged the real victims of sexual assault, and that is a lie," Carroll said. The then president declared, "People need to pay dearly," and quote, "I have paid as dearly as possible." And that is where we start this hour with MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin, who was inside the courtroom for us today. Plus, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General and former U.S. Attorney Harry Litman, and BBC News special U.S. correspondent and MSNBC contributor Katty Kay. Lisa, you were in the courtroom. How did things go down?
You know, Alicia, if before the lunch break you saw fireworks, today you saw Alina Habba try to light a fire that never quite kindled. And the reason I say that is because at virtually every angle that she turned, there were objections to the questions that she asked, either because they were argumentative or she was trying to revisit subjects that the judge has already ruled this jury must accept as true. In some cases, the objections were as basic as to the way that she formulated the question, because she was assuming certain facts that weren't yet in evidence. And all in all, I left thinking this: Alina Habba has some serious presence. Even her detractors can't deny that. But she is lacking some fundamentals and basic courtroom mechanics that made today's examination of E. Jean Carroll a whole lot less effective than she promised it would be. And her opening statement, which, as we say, was fire.
Well, there's the Alina Habba of it, and then there is the Donald Trump of it. How was the jury reacting to his shenanigans?
You know, I didn't really notice the jury interacting much with Donald Trump or even looking in his direction. They were focused, as juries often are, on the exhibits that they were being shown. In this courthouse, every juror has a screen right in front of them onto which the exhibits, as they're introduced, are projected. And a lot of the exhibits in this trial are things that really warrant your full attention. They are tweets, they are emails, they are Truth Social posts, or in some cases, they've been videos. And the jurors seem to be very focused on that, or focused on the back and forth between E. Jean Carroll and the lawyer who was examining her. The other person really who got the most attention today, and I shouldn't overlook, Alicia, is Judge Lou Kaplan, because a number of us have predicted to you that Judge Kaplan would be far more in control of his courtroom than Judge Arthur Engoron, whose courtroom is literally just a stone's throw away to my left here. And Kaplan has been that person to date. Again and again today, when applications were made, Alina Habba and her colleague not only moved for a mistrial today on the basis of evidence that they claimed erroneously E. Jean Carroll has destroyed, but they also asked Kaplan to recuse himself on the basis that he accepted, without consulting with the defense, a representation made about how Trump was reacting from Sean Crowley, who is not only E. Jean Carroll's lawyer, but previously served as a law clerk many years ago to Judge Kaplan. That was their basis for a mistrial. And both instances, Kaplan cut them off sharply, said denied, and some variation of sit down or take a seat. Lou Kaplan wants everyone to know this is his courtroom, not Donald Trump's courtroom, and he's been very effective at that so far, Alicia.
Well, some of us heard that message loud and clear. Some others did not. How did Judge Kaplan leave things for tomorrow? What are the next steps that happen in this trial?
So Alina Habba still has about 20 to 30 minutes left in her cross-examination of E. Jean Carroll. That's largely in part because her flow was interrupted so many times today by sidebars or objections. You could tell that former President Trump is frustrated that that cross-examination is not yet done. He wanted to be here for every moment that E. Jean Carroll is on the stand. So when we come back tomorrow, E. Jean Carroll will be cross-examined continuously by Alina Habba. Then there might be some redirect or sort of cleanup by her lawyer, Robbie Kaplan. The next witness that we expect is Professor Ashley Humphreys. She's the reputational expert that not only has been used previously by E. Jean Carroll, but was an expert for Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss in their own defamation case against Rudy Giuliani recently in federal court in D.C. You'll remember, Alicia, that trial ended with an award of damages in the amount of $148 million. E. Jean Carroll's lawyers have similarly invited this jury to award very significant punitive damages. They haven't yet quantified what that should look like, but they want to make Donald Trump think twice about further defaming E. Jean Carroll. They have asked the jury to consider this question: how much will it cost to make him stop? Earlier today, our colleague Chris Jansing said, Lisa, I heard you say that on Morning Joe. I want to be really clear with our viewers. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of the plaintiff's lawyers yesterday, and I expect that we'll hear it again when they close. How much will it take to make him stop? And my guess is hundreds of millions of dollars will be their answer.
Right, Harry, I was about to say that's the $1 million question, and Lisa already preemptively corrected me. It is the $100 million question. Here's the thing. Trump knew, Harry, exactly what he was doing. Today for him was about making this a show, about making this a spectacle. The entire back and forth with Judge Kaplan, where Judge Kaplan says, I know what you want me to do. You want me to toss you from this courtroom. It is apparent. It is clear. There is no subtext here, Harry.
At all. He was a spectacular jackass, showing disrespect for everyone, including the jury. I guarantee you, whether or not there was eye contact, they absolutely noticed at the end of testimony, Trump stands up, strides out of the courtroom. Everybody, I mean everybody in a court setting, waits for the jury to stand up and leave first, and he didn't do it. He showed contempt for all, and I think Habba is not simply lacking in mechanics, but in judgment here. She chose really the wrong way to try to go after a victim like E. Jean Carroll. There were points she could have scored, and instead, whether to grandstand for her client or just because she doesn't know better, she just tried to savage her. A final point, I agree with Lisa that the real drama here will be how many hundreds of millions. There's a general rule of thumb that courts of appeals, this is the Second Circuit, don't allow a huge disproportion between the compensatory part and the punitive part. Sometimes it's expressed as 5 or 6, and yet here we have a billionaire who's been absolutely incorrigible, continues to defame her even to this day. So on that question, what would it take? I think it would take a lot more than a court of appeals may endorse. Nevertheless, right now, his only hope seems to be that they award so much in punitive damages that it's trimmed on appeal. That's not a great position to be in.
Harry, for those of us who have not been in a courtroom for this type of trial, can you help us understand the interplay between the evidence that the jury was presented with, the way that they will factor that in, and the way that they are likely to factor in the behavior that they watched in court today, right? When they are deliberating amongst themselves, how much are those two things weighted?
Yeah, I mean, it's a deep mix, and it's why it's so great to have Lisa or someone who's in the courtroom just to sort of feel the vibe. It's true that most jurors, in my experience, try hard to follow the instructions, but they bring in and probably form very early, social science tells us, impressions of the various litigants, and those are not easily dislodged. And after that, they may well let the evidence kind of conform to their previous thoughts. If that theory is right, and a lot of trial lawyers hold to it, it couldn't be a worse day for Donald Trump, whose disrespect for everybody in the whole courtroom, save his own lawyer, who showed her own disrespect, was just paramount.
Kenny, I want to bring in this point that a friend of this show, a friend of E. Jean Carroll's, the one and only Joyce Vance made. She said, quote, E. Jean Carroll has continued to speak truth to power despite the consequences in a way that should make every Republican official who has bent the knee ashamed of themselves. It's pretty wild, Katty, to watch the power this 80-year-old woman successfully holding Donald Trump accountable, as we saw in May. She won her case against him. In some ways, she has had more success than anyone else.
Yeah, look, it's always difficult for victims of sexual assault and rape to speak up in public and to go through a trial. I mean, it's one of the most bruising things you can do as a victim of sexual assault, to have to relive that, to have to make your case, to have your credibility questioned is very, very difficult. And yet E. Jean Carroll last May held her own. She answered the questions, and a jury of her peers found Donald Trump guilty. And that hasn't happened before. So, it's interesting to watch these jurors this time around. How are they going to respond to his behavior? Are they going to feel that he is bullying them? I mean, the very fact that these jurors have been warned not to reveal their identities, not to tell their friends and family that they are jurors in this case, will that then make them more sympathetic to E. Jean Carroll because of what she has been through and because of the slurs and the death threats that she has received? I think it's in a way, her case has almost become the kind of public's case in this particular instance, where the juror is being warned of the kinds of things that could befall them, which are the kinds of things that have befallen E. Jean Carroll. It's the two are sort of seem to be linked in this case, and I wonder how that's going to play into what kind of damages get awarded.
Well,